Ever since the infamous Nvidia leak of 2021 occurred, fans of Final Fantasy Tactics have been clamoring for an imminent announcement of a remaster since it was featured on the list. And recently, at a Sony State of Play, 4 years later, it was officially unveiled for the first time. I would say the initial reaction was mostly positive, but as time has gone on, there's been a bit more trepidation. There's been a lot of information that has come out a little bit at a time, especially through various interviews, many of which are only in Japanese. You've probably heard about a lot of various things around the internet surrounding this remaster, some of which are true, and others of which are false. So I'm here to try my best to set the record straight and try to clear up any confusion. There are a lot of burning questions, like, will the game feature a newly orchestrated soundtrack? Will this game feature War of the Lions content like extra characters and jobs? Will it also feature the animated pre-rendered cutscenes from War of the Lions? They said there will be extensive additions and adjustments to the story, and then Yasumi Matsuno said on X that the game will feature 60% more text. So how far are they actually going with the story? Some of the decisions made have made people frustrated, and in some ways, I can understand. I personally will be picking it up at launch, as overall I think it will be a fine remaster, but there are some decisions that they've made that are just weird? They're not necessarily terrible, but they are strange decisions, so hopefully by the end of this video, you will be able to determine whether it will be worth it for you to purchase this remaster. So in case you didn't already know, the game will feature two different versions of the game. One is Classic, which is essentially going to be identical to the PS1 version of the game running on modern hardware, and feature the War of the Lions translation for the English version. The other is called Enhanced. This is more of a proper remaster of the game with touched up visuals, UI, and as our localization team put it, extensive additions and adjustments to the story. Keep in mind, these are two entirely different game modes, meaning it's not a setting you can toggle on or off. You select which version of the game you want from the beginning and create a specific save file which will be locked to that mode. If you want to switch to a different mode, you will need to create a new save file and start from the beginning in that mode. So the thing that many fans are frustrated by is the fact that neither the Classic nor Enhanced version will feature any of the War of the Lions content, or at least in terms of gameplay. These pre-rendered cutscenes, however, are a bit more complicated, which we'll get to that later. I suspected this was the case in my previous video, but this is 100% confirmed now. Here's what the director Kazutoyo Maehiro had to say in response to a question Den Feminico Gamer had about this. Which, by the way, all the translations I do are using ChatGPT, and I try my best to prompt it in a way that will generate as best a translation as I can. But I don't speak Japanese fluently, so naturally I may not be able to catch any of the mistakes it could potentially make. So if you think of Classic as a traditional remaster, Enhanced is not quite a remaster or a remake. It's more like, what would happen if we made FFT again from scratch in the modern era? Because of that mindset, we chose not to include additional characters or jobs that were added in the War of the Lions, even in Enhanced. So, you heard that right. No new jobs like Dark Knight and Onion Knight, and no additional characters like Balthier or Luso from the War of the Lions. This is of course expected for the Classic mode, as the Classic mode is only supposed to contain the content featured in the original PS1 version. However, this content also won't be featured in the Enhanced version either. So you might be wondering if this means that Cloud will still be in the game. And yes, he will be. Not only have they confirmed that Cody Christian will be voice acting in this game, although they didn't say which character he'll be voice acting, it's pretty obvious who he's going to be playing, right? But they specifically mentioned him here in this interview. So the Classic version is truly the original game just as it was? Exactly. The gameplay balance and UI are based entirely on the original PlayStation release. So things like Orlando still being overpowered, or the timing of when Cloud joins the party. So Matsuno is implying two things here. One, that Orlando is being nerfed, which is something I discovered in my previous video, so if you haven't watched that, you can check that out. And two, not only will Cloud be in the game, but he will join you earlier than he did in the original. This is intended to make it easier to level him up. And speaking of easy, another adjustment to the enhanced version of the game will be different difficulty modes. There will be casual, for players who want to purely enjoy the story, standard, matching the original difficulty, and tactical, for advanced players. So, if you're looking for a challenge, you'll certainly find it here, as the discussion continued in this interview to some interesting places. So tactical is even harder than the original? Much harder. For example, some abilities have limiters only on tactical mode. You can't just spam wholly with the scholar's arithmetic ability. You have to really think about how to fight with your jobs and abilities. It's a difficulty that delivers the true essence of a strategy RPG. And in case you were curious, the interviewer then went on to ask, can players switch difficulty during the game? Yes. You can select at the title screen, or switch any time during gameplay. And if you are wondering how the Wii Graph battle will be in this enhanced version, well, about the difficulty adjustments for the Wii Graph battle in War of the Lions, are those carried over here? Classic goes back to the original difficulty, as I mentioned. Enhanced has difficulty-specific tuning, so Wii Graph strength varies quite a lot depending on your chosen mode. Tactical modes Wii Graph will probably make you cry. I was crying even in the original. Casual is easier than War of the Lions, and tactical mode is so hard you'll wonder if it's even possible. Which difficulty would you recommend? Standard. We designed it to strike a good balance for both newcomers and original fans. For example, abilities like Charge +7, which were pretty useless in the original, are now usable, and many small parts have been adjusted as well. However, there is one other notable thing regarding the gameplay that you also might be interested in, and that's this. So instead of picking your formation for battle on a separate screen altogether, you'll be able to view the battlefield and enemies while you're on this screen. And you can even see that you'll be able to access the character menu, where you'll also be able to swap equipment in and out, as well as other abilities. Gone are the days of guessing which party members would be optimal for a particular encounter. This is definitely an enhancement from the original game, if you ask me. One other thing that may be disappointing for some, though, is that there won't be any rearrangements of the soundtrack. So, are the original soundtrack pieces also used in this new version? Yes, we basically kept the original tracks untouched. That's because the music is what players remember most vividly. As a gamer myself, I know that changing the music when replaying an old game can make it feel different in an instant. So to faithfully recreate the atmosphere of the definitive edition, we kept the original music intact. While I love the original soundtrack to Final Fantasy Tactics, it would have been cool to be able to listen to fully orchestrated versions of the music like they did with the Tactics Ogre soundtrack back on the PSP. And then for some reason, they remastered the orchestration again for Tactics Ogre Reborn. Anyway, not only did Hitoshi Sakamoto and his team at Base Escape come back to rearrange the soundtrack to be fully orchestrated, but he even composed wholly new parts to the songs, which, in my opinion, make them way better than they even were originally. It would have been cool to see him come back to give the same treatment to Final Fantasy Tactics as well, but oh well. But some of the biggest questions for this remaster is how much of the story has been changed. When Square Enix first unveiled this game, they mentioned in the trailer that it would feature extensive additions and adjustments to the story. Then on X, Yasumi Matsuno said that, while I haven't counted exactly, I estimate that the main scenario's volume in the Japanese version is approximately plus 60% that of the original PS1 version. This does not include system-related text, such as organization screens, chanting text, brave stories, sound novels, and movie parts. It is difficult to compare the total amount of text between the old and new versions, so we will not do so here. Thank you. In my previous video, I theorized that there could be additional story segments with Delita, and since we know that Orlando doesn't come with the Excalibur weapon anymore, maybe there would be an additional side quest to get that maybe incorporates some of his backstory. Will this happen? Nope. So the enhanced version features these kinds of subtle dialogue revisions. Yes, as I mentioned, we're not adding any new characters or events, it's more about refining what's already there. Or maybe it's more accurate to say we're finally including the things we didn't have time to implement back then, due to scheduling constraints. In another interview, Matsuno explains, "Back when we developed the original, we had to cut certain parts due to time constraints. For instance, once characters like Agrius and Sid joined your party, they barely spoke again. This time, we've added battle dialogue so they speak more during fights. Mustadio also has a lot more lines after joining the party." He then explains in more detail how battle dialogue will work in this remaster. Exactly, we haven't altered the story itself, but take someone like Marquis Elmdor. He barely spoke in the original. Now he has plenty of lines. Different characters will respond to him in different ways, so I hope players experiment. Also, later in the story, Vormov speaks too. Try adding a variety of allies to your attack party and see what happens. But it's not just battle dialogue that has been adjusted. He also mentioned this. Exactly. As I mentioned before, I was very aware that the story had to lean into fantasy elements by the end. That said, players who came in expecting something more like Tactics Ogre, where humans struggle against other humans, were sometimes disappointed. I did hear feedback like, "I wish the story had ended with a purely human conflict." That's something we slightly adjusted in the enhanced version. We revised some of the dialogue to emphasize the man versus man dynamic more strongly, even though the battles and story beats themselves remain unchanged. We made this choice with today's broader and more mature audience in mind. It's a minor spoiler, but rather than just saying he became a Lukavi, we tried to focus more on why he became a Lukavi. So let me recap. There will be no new battles and no new scenario events. However, as I discovered in my previous video, all of the dialogue has been completely rewritten by Yasumi Matsuno himself. And so the changes that are being made are simply just rewrites of the dialogue itself, and the plus 60% increase in Japanese text is likely just from extended dialogue. While they didn't outright say there will be no new additional cutscenes, based upon everything he said, it's pretty much confirmed that there won't be additional cutscenes, just that the cutscenes themselves will be rewritten and may have more dialogue than they initially did. So, why are they making this change? Well, Yasumi Matsuno explains this as well. Also, in the original version, we were very limited in how many characters we could display in dialogue. Now we can use as much as we want, and with the characters actually speaking, we had to rewrite the script so it flows naturally when voiced. In that sense, the entire script has been overhauled. We even tailored many lines to suit the specific voice actors we cast, since we had the freedom to request our top choices. We especially rewrote Rams's lines with Shinosuke Tachibana in mind. We imagined how he would deliver each line and rewrote accordingly. Gafgarian's lines were also written specifically with Wataru Takagi in mind. So the reason they've changed the dialogue is that not only were they limited in terms of how many characters they could fit inside the text box on the PS1, but also the fact that they're adding voice acting and that they wanted the dialogue to sound more natural and to fit the voice actors that they casted for the Japanese version of the game. Now, does this matter to us? Somewhat, but not a whole lot to be honest. You have to understand that we're always getting a filtered version of the story as we have to view it from the lens of the translator translating the script from Japanese to English. So whether the nuanced changes to the dialogue to reflect things like the man versus man dynamic more strongly will get across in our version remains to be seen. To us playing it in English, it's mostly going to just feel like a new interpretation of the script again, similar to how we got a new translation of the script for the War of the Lions version, but with some additional new battle dialogue. But at the end of the day, it's going to be pretty much the same exact story. It doesn't seem like there's going to be any real significant changes. This isn't going to be like the Final Fantasy VII remake. So, given the fact that the entire script is being rewritten, that would mean that for the pre-rendered cutscenes from the War of the Lions, they would need to be recreated again from scratch to match the new dialogue. So, will these be included in the enhanced version? Yes and no, but also yes. This is where some of the decision making gets a bit weird for me. But before I try to explain things, let me just show you what the developer said. Basically, when we overhauled the UI for the enhanced version, we improved usability for features that existed in the original game. State of the Realm remains faithful to the original content as its base, but since we had a fantastic movie created by Kamikaze Doga during the War of the Lions version, we included it as a content piece for recalling and revisiting the story. Players can watch it in full HD resolution with voice acting. Wow, that sounds exciting. Although we aim to stay true to the original, Kamikaze Doga's movie was so impressive and personally one of my favorites, so I pushed to include it. However, if we tried to overlay all the original event dialogue onto that movie, it would reduce the amount of information compared to the full event scenes, so we struggled with where to place it. Ultimately, we made it an extra bonus within the State of the Realm that you can watch freely. I see. Must have been tough fitting all the original event dialogue into the movie's length. Exactly. We wrote new dedicated lines specifically for the movie. The impression might differ from the original event, even if the scenes are the same. Timing was a challenge, but my hero-san kindly inserted cue marks into the video beforehand to indicate when lines should be spoken, which helped us a lot during recording. In that sense, the movie really reflects his dedication. So, allow me to explain how this is going to work, or at least this is my interpretation. When they first unveiled the announcement trailer, they showed clips of a pre-rendered cutscene that is most obviously the opening that has the exact same art style as the War of the Lions scenes. So it looks like animation studio Kamikaze Doga has come back to work on this title. However, later in that same trailer, we see in-engine footage of the cutscene between Ramza and Delita, where they play Blades of Grass. This scene in The War of the Lions was recreated as a pre-rendered cutscene, but it's not depicted as such in this new remaster. This is kind of weird since it seems like they brought the animation studio back to create the opening from the ground up again. So why not just remake some of these scenes as well? I think I'm following their logic, but it is a bit weird, since they keep saying that they're not using any of the War of the Lions content, and they're really just remastering the original version as a base. Then, I guess according to them, any of the scenes in the middle of the game being fully animated would be straying too far from the original game. If you recall, the PS1 version did have pre-rendered cutscenes, but only for the opening and ending sequences, so it sounds like that's the model they're sticking to. While we don't have 100% confirmation the ending cutscene will be redone by animation studio Kamikaze Doga, it is easily predictable that they probably will if they manage to recreate the opening scene, since that would be staying true to the original version of the game. So all of the pre-rendered cutscenes that were featured in the middle of the game, like this one here, will be viewable from the State of the Realm menu, which is the enhanced version of the Brave Story feature from the original game. It sounds like you'll be able to view them there as sort of a recap of the story in a sense. Now, you'll notice that they were talking about how it would be difficult to match the timing of the voice acting that they've added in this enhanced version with these cutscenes, and at first I was a bit confused because I figured they would just be newly created, but that's obviously not the case. They said that these cutscenes would be in HD, so I think what they mean to say is all of these cutscenes are going to be the exact same cutscenes that we saw on the PSP, just upscaled to a higher resolution. And then they mentioned that because it was difficult to fit the new lines of dialogue into the timing of these scenes, they've actually written new lines of dialogue and recorded new voice lines specifically to match the old cutscene. Mind you, these are different from the rewritten lines of dialogue that will appear in the main game. If you're confused, I don't blame you. I think it will make sense once you actually play the game. But to recap, only the opening and ending cutscenes will be completely remade by animation studio Kamikaze Doga. The pre-rendered cutscenes that normally appeared in the middle of the game will only be viewable from the State of the Realm, and they're the same versions as the PSP game, just upscaled with newly voiced lines. Hopefully that makes sense. So this is where I have some gripes. So they want this enhanced version to be true to the original game, but they want to make it as if they were releasing it in the modern era. So I guess rewriting the entire script and adding voice acting isn't straying too far from the original, but inserting fully animated cutscenes is. Completely overhauling the UI isn't straying too far from the original game, but not giving the player the option to listen to a newly arranged soundtrack is. Like, I'm following the logic they have, but barely. And it's even harder to follow when you consider the fact that they're already adding a classic mode that is supposed to be a one-to-one recreation of the original game. So you would think that they just wouldn't give a fuck and add whatever the hell they wanted in the enhanced version, since you still have the option of playing the classic mode if you don't like the new additions. I would have preferred it if they took more risks by adding new battles and new sections of the story, in my opinion, because, as I just said, if I think it's terrible, then I could just go back and play the classic mode instead. Some people are saying, well, the whole point is to preserve the original game since they lost the assets to the original game and the War of the Lions. Well, that's a moot argument, because if their goal was for the greater good of preserving video games, then they would also preserve the War of the Lions content. But they're also not including that either. The team that is working on this remaster are many of the original developers who worked on the PS1 version, and the War of the Lions release was created by a different team. So I think the real answer is they just don't really agree with some of the things that were changed in the War of the Lions version. So that's why they're not including them. And to be honest, not including that content isn't a big deal for me personally. I remember recruiting Balthier and Luso, but I honestly can't remember if I even unlocked the Dark Knight or Onion Knight jobs, and I certainly never did the multiplayer missions since I didn't have anybody to play the game with. There are still plenty of additional characters to unlock that are really cool from the original game, like Cloud, Worker 8, Reyes, and Beowulf. So that's plenty of characters as it is, not to mention all of the characters you recruit as part of the main story, like Mustadio, Agrius, Meliadul, and Orlandu. But for some of you, the lack of additional gameplay content may be a problem. If you've already played the game multiple times and you're not really all that interested in the extra lines of dialogue added to the cutscenes, then there may not be anything for you in this version. And in fact, there's less content in this version of the game. I will point out, however, that for dedicated fans, there is a hard difficulty mode which may be something you're interested in, but some of you were probably not interested in the challenge so much as unlocking new jobs or characters. So I won't fault you if you see no reason to purchase this version of the game. But for the rest of you, there's still plenty of good reasons to purchase this version of the game, especially if you're on board with the dialogue changes. The enhanced UI, voice acting, updated visuals, and just the fact that you can actually play it on modern consoles now still makes this the most accessible version of the game. And I will mention that there were technical issues with the War of the Lions version of the game, such as significant frame rate drops during attacks, as well as the audio definitely not sounding right. So that version isn't exactly perfect in and of itself, and this version won't have any of those issues. And I know that I said that I was going to rush to play Final Fantasy Tactics before this remaster releases, but since it's going to be a lot closer to the original game than I initially thought, I've decided to wait until then to play it. But anyway, if you haven't checked out my previous video on Orlandu being nerfed, you can check that out right here.